Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Fabric Time. You're gonna have to put up with me droning today because my music guy has decided that he's got better things to do on a Friday night at 8 o'clock than hang out with his dad. Can't say I blame him. All that being said, welcome to another episode of Fabric Time. And please forgive my appearance. We were out of power this morning, so I kind of got dressed and combed my hair in the dark. I don't know if I look any different than I normally do because I guess, getting dressed and combing my hair in the dark, I probably look that way every day. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about, I'm totally unprepared for this today because it's been a long week. We have Kimberbell tomorrow. If you go on our site, I don't know if any of you follow embroidery, machine embroidery type things, but Kimberbell, it's a nice little event. We're doing that tomorrow, so I've spent most of the day preparing for that. Kate's going to be teaching that. We've got the classroom all set up. It's a really nice setup. We do have space for one more person, so if you're not doing anything tomorrow, sign up now. Go to our website, check it out. There's one seat left. Sign up tonight, so tomorrow morning I can get you all set up before we get started. Or next Wednesday we'll be doing it. We're running another one. There's 2 or 3 seats still available on that one. If I get enough interest from this, we might run a third event for this, but I don't know. It depends on how reception goes. We'll be doing it again probably in January, February. So we're doing that tomorrow. I really should have a class list in front of me to tell you the stuff we're working on, but I don't because, like I said, it's been a crazy day. Most of which the last couple of days has been spent playing with thread. And I think my comments are enabled. So if you have any questions or want to say anything, just feel free to comment below. And if for some reason, yeah, it looks like it's going. Okay. Anyway, so I've been rearranging the thread because, thread is so much fun. And it got me thinking, I'm going to teach you everything I know about thread. Well, probably not everything I know about thread, but thread is an interesting topic. And so I just thought we would get into that today. I know it's just fabric time, but thread is part of that whole thing. So we're going to talk about the difference in thread because you have all sorts of threads. I don't even have Invisifill. Hold on a second. I forgot to grab something. 1 second. Excuse me. I'm going off camera. I'm going to make noise. There we go. So anyway, I'm back. One of the things about thread is it can get kind of confusing because if you look at here at the store, we have a ton. I don't want to say a ton, but we have a lot of different threads. You have cotton, you have polyester, you have rayon, you've got 60 weight, you've got 40 weight. I think we even have some 30 weight. We have some 12 weight over there even. And then what's it all mean? And we're going to get into that today. So right off the bat, standard cotton thread, standard sewing thread, 50 weight cotton. That's what most people sew with, 50 or a 40 weight. The weight of the thread is how thick it is. Real basic. The higher the number, the thinner the thread. The lower the number, the thicker the thread. So if you have a 40 weight thread, that's a little bit thicker than a 50 weight thread. And if you have something like Invisifill, this is a 100 weight thread. So it's super fine versus 40 weight. 50 weight. Make some comments if you're watching this because I feel like I'm talking to myself here. And, I don't want to feel like I'm alone. I don't even have my music today. Anyway, so most people, when they piece, are using 50 weight cotton. That's just a good thread. Aurifil is what most people use. This happens to be Wonderfill, very similar to Aurifil, except Wonderfill is a 2-strand versus a 3-strand, which makes Aurifil a little bit lighter. But 50 weight cotton is what most people use for standard sewing. For embroidery, you're going to use 40 weight thread, typically speaking. And we have run experiments using 50 weight versus 40 weight because we had a lot of 50 weight cotton and we tried to, and I wanted to embroider with it. So we ran some tests out and it doesn't embroider as well because it's a hair thinner. So you don't get the coverage that you need in a satin stitch or if you're filling in an embroidery pattern, it doesn't fill as nicely. It gets like some lines because that thread is really stacked in there and just that hair that it's off. So whenever you're embroidering, typically you're going to want to use 40 weight or lower, 40 or even 30 weight. Every machine embroidery thread is going to be 40 weight. If it doesn't say it on the package, it's 40 weight thread. Oh, you're welcome, I guess. So Danny is out there. Steve, Danny, I'm glad you're watching because your machine is going to be on tonight. It's going to be famous. So anyway, back to what we were talking about, thread. It's just as exciting as it is. Most unlabeled embroidery thread is going to be 40 weight. It's typically 40 weight polyester. Sometimes it's rayon. Difference between what it's made of. Cotton is all natural fibers. Cotton is king. Everybody loves cotton. Personally, I like polyester because it's a little bit more rugged. I can sew faster with it. It's harder to break. See, here's some poly. Well, that's not a good example. It breaks pretty easy, but poly is going to be a little bit stronger than cotton. Rayon is going to be very similar to cotton in its use. Sometimes it's depending on how old it is. Sometimes rayon is a little bit less strong than cotton, but rayon and cotton are very similar in how they sew out. And the reason that you will often see rayon threads, like for example, this variegated, I'm going to switch over to the other camera here just because I feel like I'm probably boring you guys talking about everything else. But this here's a variegated thread. Now, variegated thread, if I get myself too close to the camera, see here, variegated thread, which I know a lot of you like. What makes variegated is you'll notice that the thread changes colors as it goes. And that's variegated. Now you're only going to get variegated thread in either cotton or rayon, and that's got a lot to do with how it's dyed. You can't dye polyester this way. Polyester is one solid color because of the process for coloring it. So all your variegated thread is going to be either rayon or cotton. So that's one of the things you'll be limited when you're looking at thread: rayon, cotton, polyester. There's nylon thread out there. I think it used to be a popular thing. I don't know. I sewed with nylon thread once. It was the worst experience I ever had. Nylon is very stretchy, and it's a real pain in the butt when you're sewing with it. You do get a little bit of stretch off of cotton and rayon, but not near as much as you get off nylon. And of course, poly is, like I said, I like poly. My favorite kind of thread is actually this stuff right here, Polycore wrap. This is actually a 50 weight thread, but it's got a polyester inner lining and it's wrapped in cotton. So it has the look of cotton, the feel of cotton, but the strength of polyester. This stuff is fun to work with. It works great. I use a lot of this on the long arm. So that's kind of the basics of thread. Big thing, like I said, lower the number, the thicker the thread, higher the number, the thinner the thread. And just something to keep in mind, if you're using super thin threads, like why would you want to use those? It's for decorative stitching, or you don't want your seams to show. If you want a really tight seam allowance, use a thinner thread. Use a shorter stitch length with thinner thread. Like Invisifill is a 100 weight thread. This is super fine. I don't even know if you can see on the camera, but if you look at this, that's some super fine thread. And that you're going to want to shorten your stitch length. Whenever you use thread, shorten your stitch length a little bit, and that will so strength doesn't become an issue. So shorter stitches will give you your seam just as strong as a regular 50 weight if you're using 100 weight, because the shorter stitch length gives you the strength you need. Now, I don't know if you found any of that interesting. That's just the basics of thread. I'm going to get into some practical things about thread. That because for me personally, whenever I'm sewing, whatever I grab, I just go with. If I find a 40 or 50 weight, I just throw it on the machine and go. I'll use old bobbins. I have half-filled bobbins from the long arm. I'll throw on and quilt. Any quilt that I make probably has at least a dozen different colors in it, because I'm just grabbing whatever to sew with it. Because if the tension is right on your machine, nobody's going to see your thread on a quilt. And I know that's awful to say, and people will think that's sacrilegious to just throw whatever thread on there. But if your tension is right, you shouldn't see the thread on the top. Now, when you're top stitching, that's another story. We'll get into that later. But like I said, when I sew, I just grab whatever and go. So you don't have to lose a lot of sleep over this. But we could talk about thread forever. But I want to get into some practical stuff as we're going. And I'm going to check comments. What would you use the 100 weight for? That's an excellent question from Madgar, a.k.a. Danny. 100 weight thread, my mom loves it for doing minis. Because with a 100 weight thread, because we're going to get into this in just a second, you can use a much finer needle. Because one of the things on a needle you have to worry about is the eye. So here's a needle. We'll go back over here. And we're going to talk about the anatomy of a needle. And that focus is awful. But the eye right here is on a smaller needle. As the needle gets smaller, that eye gets smaller. So with a thread, excuse me, you can use a much finer needle. You can get down to like a 60 or, what are they, a 60, 80, a really fine needle. So you can get, so if you're doing minis, you can get really tight seam allowances with like 100-weight thread. The other thing that I use it for a lot is I'll use it on a long arm machine. If I don't want I'm trying to quilt, but I don't want the thread to really be pronounced in whatever I'm quilting, I use 100-weight so you don't really see the thread. But a lot, like I said, it's mostly for finer work, and if you kind of want it to disappear. And so that brings me to needle size, because when you talk about thread, you also need to talk about needle size. Because if you look at needles, I could show you the needle board over there. A plethora of needles. There's a ton of them. You've got top stitch, you've got quilting, you've got stretch, you've got micro. It's a ton of stuff. Keeping with needles, it's different. On thread, as the number gets smaller, the thread gets thicker. On the needle, as the number gets smaller, the needle gets smaller. So it's the opposite of thread. Now you've got standard size. You've got like a 7511s, 8012s, and 9014s. Those are your three basic needle sizes that you'll sometimes see 116s, and it's 100/16, 90/14, because needles have there's two gauges for measuring needles, and what most needle manufacturers do, I'm just tripping over myself, is rather than stick to one gauge, they actually have both. So the 90/14, those two numbers are actually two different measurement systems for needles. So a size 90 needle is always going to be the same size as a 14. 90/14 is just different. And I read the vagaries of that once, and it was so important that I don't even remember it. It doesn't really matter. The 90 is one way of measuring it, and then the 14 is another way. So if somebody's looking for a size 14 needle, that's the same as a size 90 needle. A size 12 needle is the same as a size 80 needle. So you got an 80/12, 90/14, 100/16, and I've just completely bored you about needle sizes and how the nomenclature, and it means something, and I can't remember what, and I don't really care. The important thing is to know that it's a size. And you're all still with me. We have a whole 5 people. We lost somebody because we had 6 people watching. The problem with watching this on YouTube is you can see when people get bored. And I'm 12 minutes into this, and I still have 5 of you, but I know Danny has 2 browsers open, so there's probably really only 4 of you. So back to what we were talking about, needle size. My go-to needle is a 9014 universal. The reason I like a 9014 universal is it's universal, so it's good for just about everything. And 9014 is kind of a catch-all size, because as the needles get smaller, so an 8012 is a size smaller than a 9014. So an 8012 is smaller. So if you go up in thread size, so say you work, then it may not fit through the eye of the needle. The big thing, there's 2 things that you kind of want to, a few things you want to match with the needle: the type of fabric you're on and the size of thread that you're using. Those are the 2 things that kind of dictate what you're using for a needle. So pretty good rule of thumb, if you're using 40 weight will run in a 7511. And I know this because most people embroider with an embroidery 7511 needle, and most embroidery thread is 40 weight. I like to go up a size or 2 with 40 weight, because but you want to match the thread size to the needle size. So like I said, a 40 weight does work in a 7511. I would recommend it running 40 weight in an 8012. 7511 will work, but at higher speeds, you may get some shredding and some breakage. So I tend to go up to an 8012. Like I said, I tend to use a 9014 for everything. Problem with the 9014 for everything, for the hardcore sewers out there, is it's a bigger needle. And what does a bigger needle do? Okay. Audrey's on there about heavy thread top stitching. We're going to get to that in just a second. Bigger needle, if you're using an oversized needle, bigger needles make bigger holes. That is not a huge issue with cotton fabric. So if you're running a 9014 and you're quilting, it doesn't matter, because in cotton fabric, you're going between the weave. You're not cutting the threads. That's what a microtex is for, is to cut the threads. So if you're sewing in a synthetic, you want the smallest needle you can get, because you're actually going to be poking a hole through it. Whereas cotton, you're kind of going between the weaves, so you can get away with a bigger needle. So 9014 is my go-to needle. And let's address Audrey's question real quick while we're thinking of it, before I get lost on a tangent about something else. So she asks, well, if you're all watching this, you probably see it in the chat screen. Try a real heavy thread to do top stitching. How would that affect the tension on a machine with auto tension? Good question. Tension is a whole nother mysterious science that you must converse with the ancients of the earth about before you touch, because tension is sacred. Okay, maybe not. Tension is meant to be played with. Depending on your tensioning system is how it's going to tension. There's two basic sewing machines have a plate system. So there's two plates in there that squeeze together, that squeeze your thread together. So the thicker the thread, typically speaking, if the thread is thicker, then those plates are squishing it harder at the same setting than if it's a thinner thread. But I wouldn't worry about it, because what tends to happen is the thread's not going to sit as deep in the tension assembly as it does when it's thicker than if it's thinner. My general experience is it gets to diminishing returns, but you will actually, your tension may need to be looser for smaller threads, because it will seat in that tension assembly a little bit deeper, and it may may make your tension a little tighter if it's a smaller thread than a thicker thread, because a thicker thread isn't going to pull in as much. And that's the whole mystery behind pre-tension, which is a whole nother mechanical issue. But typically speaking, I wouldn't mess with the tension too much. The best thing to do if you're using a thicker thread is run a test stitch. Leave your tension set where it's at and run a test stitch. See what it looks like. If it looks funky, if it's pulled to the back, loosen it on the top. If it's pulling the bobbin up, loosen it. If it's getting pulled to the bottom, tighten it a little bit. And that's the best thing to do. A lot of the auto machines now, if your tension is set to like the mid, like usually 3 or 4, I wouldn't mess with it too much. It's probably going to be just fine. You can fine tune it with a heavier thread. You may want to back it off a little bit. And she says she tried it once and it was an awful mess on the back. And that's quite possible. And what's interesting, a little secret is, if you get these big loopies on the back, that means that your top tension is too loose. Sometimes what happens is your tension gets held open and it just feeds through. If you have a mess on the back and it's your top thread getting pulled through, then you want to take your machine off auto tension and actually tighten it a little bit if it's pulling through to the bottom. What will happen is, if you're too tight, your thread will actually break. You're not going to get a huge mess if your tension is too tight. It's when your tension is too loose that you get a mess when you're stitching. So if you tried it, Audrey, and you're getting a mess on the back, my suspicion is you weren't tight enough on the tension on the top. And that goes back to what we were saying, that the way it sits in the plates, it wasn't getting pulled in all the way. And that may be a function of how it was threaded, because thicker threads act a little different. Or the pre-tension may be different. But typically you tighten it down a little bit and you should be fine. The other thing you can do is kind of floss it into the assembly. Here, I'll show you. Because if you look at a machine, we're getting way out. We're going to go on for longer. If you have a thicker thread in here, what you may want to do with it is always thread with the foot up, by the way, with your foot up, because most tensions are, the tension isn't set on your machine until the foot's down. If you thread it with the foot down, it may not sit in the tension assembly. But sometimes with thicker threads, you may have to put it in there and actually hold it at the top and pull it in to make sure that it seats in the tension assembly. That's just because the thicker is not going to go through that wheel very well. But you're going to have another problem if you're that thick, and that's going to be, is it going to go through your needle? If you get too thick, the thread doesn't go through your needle. 12 weight is as heavy as you can go on your top thread and still have it run in your machine. And at that size, you're going to want to be using a 116 needle. That's a pretty big needle. That's almost a nail. That's a giant needle. But that's as big as you're going to go, is 12 weight. If you get much past that, you're going to have a hard time threading your needle. And even if you do get your needle threaded, you're not going to have enough movement through the eye, and you're just going to break thread. I don't know if that answered your, oh, and then one more question out of your head is, which way is tighter? The higher the number on your tension, the tighter the top tension is. The smaller the number, the looser it is. So, general rule of thumb: if your top thread is getting pulled to the bottom, you want to make your number go higher. You want to tighten your tension. If your bobbin thread is getting pulled up to the top, you want to loosen your top tension so you bring the number down. Hope that answered your question, because that was an awful lot of rambling for Audrey. Anyway. So I hope you all got something out of that, and we'll go back to where we were at. Needles. So needles. So like we're saying, 12 weight thread is about as thick as you can go and still have it run on your machine. Now there is bobbin work, which is a whole nother issue, and I'm not going to get into that. 12 weight thread, 116 needle. The other, so you want to match the thread size to the needle size. And like I said, my general rule of thumb is 40 weight will run pretty fast, pretty smooth on a 90-14. On an 80-12, 40 weight will run pretty good. But I tend to like to run a 50 weight. I don't like to go much thicker than a 50 on an 80-12. I will run 40 on an 80-12 needle, and it will run fine. But I tend to, my general rule of thumb is 40 is a 90-14. It just works for me. Some people tell you 80. So a lot of people run 75-11. That's a pretty common size, and that will run 40 weight and 50 weight without too much of an issue. My rule of thumb, 90-14, just for everything. Now, the other thing that you have to keep in mind with a needle is, now we're going to go back to close-ups here because back to the close-ups. Here's my needle because I don't know which way is up. I don't know. How does the weatherman do that? Know which way to point on the blue screen. So the other thing you have to worry about with a needle is what they call deflection. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this as I do this. But needles, in the course of sewing, are actually designed to bend. And I'm not going to do it too much with my finger because I'm going to end up bleeding all over the place. So it's what they call needle deflection. Needle deflection is an important concept to understand because a smaller needle, like a 60-10, which is a tiny needle, which you can use with finer thread for really fine work, a 60-10 is going to have a lot of flex to it. That's called deflection. And if you have too much flex to your needle, and we're going to go back over here, what's going to happen is, let's see if I can do this without making, if I can demonstrate this. What's going to happen if there's too much flex to your needle is as you're sewing in the upstroke, that needle is getting pulled by your fabric. I'm like not looking at my screen. Is getting pulled by your fabric as it feeds through. So your fabric will feed through here, and when your needle's in the down position, it's pounding through the fabric, and then there's a little bit of deflection as it gets pulled. If you have a small needle, that deflection is going to be a little too great, and your bobbin hook won't catch the thread. So if you get a lot of skip stitches, if you're working on those jelly roll rugs that were very popular, where you have the jelly roll and you put some cotton batting in it, you sew it in a big circle, and it's this big thick rope thing, and you're fighting with it and swearing at it because it's uneven and bumpy and it's skipping stitches and you're just hating life, your needle's too small. What happens on those thicker projects is the needle gets a lot of bend in it as it's going, and it bends too far out and misses your bobbin hook, and you're getting skip stitches. So if you're ever sewing along and you're getting skip stitches, timing is like, oh my gosh, it's out of timing, skip stitches. Well, if it was sewing fine 2 minutes before, it's probably just your needle size. Go up to a 90-14, 116, or up to an 80-12 if you're on like a 60-10. But go up a needle size or two, and that usually solves the problem. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is how thick your fabric is also going to determine how big of a needle to use. All right, so far so good. We're going to keep going. Normally we stop at like a half hour. We're at 22 minutes in. If I go blank for a second, it's because my camera turned off, and we're going to keep going because I'm not to what I really wanted to cover tonight. What I really wanted to cover is we're going to get into right now. Hopefully, maybe we can cover it into 5 minutes. If not, we'll reset the camera, and you can all hang on for more excitement. What I wanted to get into is thread path, is I think the technical name for it. Thread path. It sounds really old. A thread path. We're going to make sure the thread path is right. Thread path is just basically how the thread goes through your machine. And very important on thread path, one of the basic concepts. Now, this is an interesting thing because it's one of those like internet things. You could probably go on and fight people about this if you really wanted to. At the end of the day, is it super important? Depends who you ask. I'm going to explain to you the concept behind it. Now, what I'm going to explain to you is kind of important on something like a long arm because you have a longer thread path. Now, when we talk about thread path, let's bring this bad boy out here. When we talk about thread, so let's look at this machine here. We'll get to your machine here in a minute, Danny, because you're just going to show something. So the thread path, when we talk about thread path, it's how we get the thread from here down to the needle. The thread path is, believe it or not, the path that it takes. The longer the thread path, the more important the concept of thread twist is going to be. And I'm going to explain thread twist to you here in just a second, what I'm talking about. So on a long arm, getting from the thread to the needle is a much longer journey than it is on this machine. And it's in this machine here, which is even shorter throat space, this one here, it's a much shorter path because the comparatively speaking, your throat space is less, so you have a shorter thread path. So thread path is not a big issue. What we're about to talk here as far as thread twist is not a huge issue on smaller home machines. So what I'm about to explain to you is if you have a small machine, this probably doesn't mean a thing to you. As you start getting into the bigger machines, into some of these like the Dream Creator, the new Illuminaire, those got huge throats on them. So your thread path is fairly long. And if you're embroidering at super high speeds, this twist issue could become an issue if you're not aware of it. So what am I talking about? Give me 1 second. I'm going to reset the camera so it doesn't kill me without me knowing it. And because, you know, I've explained to you how this isn't a video camera, so it doesn't. That should keep me from. I don't know if that'll work. Hopefully that should work. Hopefully that should reset it for me. If not, it's going to go black here in like 5 minutes. And you'll be like, what the hell is he doing? Yeah, like I said, because it's a still photography versus a video camera, I only got like about a half hour out of it before the shutter redoes it. So that little quick thing I just did should reset it, and we should be able to go for another half hour. Anyway, complete tangent. And I don't know how many people are still there with you. Oh, great question online. How often do you change the needles? You want the official answer or do you want my answer? I change the needles when they break. And that is awful. I'm going to not lie to you. That is not a good thing to do. My needles, when they break, I change them. You can also tell when they need to be changed because you hear that pokety poke. You'll hear it poking through the fabric if it needs to be changed. When you can hear that pop as you're sewing, it definitely needs to be changed. Now, hardcore people that sew and quilt will tell you every queen size quilt change a needle. The way, as much sewing as I find that I'm breaking a needle by then anyway. If you do have like I said, you'll know when it's time to change your needle. There's a couple things you'll hear. You'll hear it pop. You'll hear this distinct pop as you're sewing. That's the needle popping through the thread. You want to change it when you hear that. The other thing that you'll run into with a dull needle is if you're ever doing like you know, if you're sewing like half square triangles and it gets stuck in the plate, like the needle goes down and your fabric gets stuck in the feed dogs, that's a pretty good indication you want to change your needle when your fabric starts getting pushed into the feed dogs. That's another good indication. But like I said, I pretty much wait till I break a needle. I break them often enough that I'll just change them at that point. And that's how I do it. But like I said, if I have my 1/4 inch foot on and I'm in a zigzag and I forget to change it and it hits it and makes an awful sound, I'll change my needle because I know I just dulled it. But that's usually when I change it. But like I said, good rule of thumb after every queen size quilt is what a lot of people recommend. Let's see. Any other questions? Okay. No questions yet, but I'll keep checking the comments. If you have comments, just ask the questions. Back to what we were talking about. Thread path. Okay. This is an interesting concept because this is why I wanted to get this machine out here, because the old school way of doing thread is this guy here. As I bore you all. Okay. This is your spool pin, and you would put your thread on there and then thread your machine, right? Now, if you look at this machine, what happens when I put thread on there? My thread is laying down. That one's standing up, that one's laying down, which is correct. Does anybody know? Does anybody know which is correct? Stand it up or lay it down. All the new fancy machines, they're laying down, but this one stands it up. Truth is, it depends. And this is where we get into thread twist. And like I said, on the smaller machine, thread twist isn't going to be a big issue because it's a shorter thread path. This one, probably not as big of an issue either, fairly short thread path. Like I said, as you get into longer throats, thread path is longer, so thread twist can become an issue, and you'll see it like on embroidery machines. All right, so far so good? Depends. Yeah, that's right, Denny. It depends. And you know what it depends on? It depends on how your spool was wound. So if you look at this spool here, let's see if it shows on there. You can kind of, actually, you'll probably see it better on this. If you look at this spool, you'll notice that the thread is round in a cross pattern. It's wound on the spool in a cross pattern. And you're also going to know anytime you see a cone, this is a giant cone, all cones are in a cross pattern. Even mini cones are wound in a cross pattern. That's because when it's wound in a cross pattern like that, the thread is supposed to pull off of the top. You'll notice as I pull it, the cone doesn't move, it stays still. So that's why you have cone stands. You sit it here, you run it through the top, and then you bring it to where you want to go. And this would run the same on a spool stand as well. You can set it there, but the thread is designed to come off the top when you have a cross pattern. So when you lay it down, how's the thread coming? It's feeding off the top of the spool. So that is correct. However, when you stand it up over here, what happens if I run it? You see how the spool is spinning? Can you see the spin? Or you just have to take my word for it that it's spinning here. We'll do a up close action shot. You ready? Does it spin? Where's that? There's it. Look at that. Okay, it's spinning. Woo, look at that. All right. So that is not good. This spool is not designed to spin as the thread comes off of it. It's wound in a cross pattern, means it's supposed to come off the top. What happens when you pull it and the thread moves? It is twisting or untwisting your thread, depending on if it's that way or if it's that way. And this wasn't wound to have that additional twist put in it as you take the thread off of it. So anytime you see a cross pattern, that spool is designed to come off the top. So most of your thread you're getting at quilt shops and stuff nowadays is going to be in that cross pattern. Some of the old Coates and Clark stuff is going to be, it's hard to see. This is all I had in the shop that was wound. So it looks like sparkly unicorn thread, and it's wound. If you can see, I don't know if you can see, but it's wound. It's wound in straight lines instead of a cross. It's wound straight. So this thread is designed to pull off and spin as it pulls. It's not designed to come off the top. So if you take it off the top, what happens now is it's going to twist as it comes off, and it's not supposed to have twists in it. The other stuff was wound to come off like that and not twist. This one will twist or untwist as it comes off, and that can cause problems. This was designed, however, to sit on here, because look what happens when you pull it. You see it turns. If it's wound straight, it is supposed to turn as the thread comes off. So far, so good? Y'all with me? So, like I said, on a short distance, you're not going to put enough twists in there to make a difference. This thread there, maybe not. But if you're running this here on your embroidery machine, which you may, and you're on here and this is coming through, you may at some time find that you're starting to shred thread and it's starting to do these really weird, what you'll get sometimes is these weird looking knots underneath. And those knots are a result of the twist in the thread getting pulled in. So if you're getting that, just check to make sure that your thread's loaded right. And then here's the secret I'm going to show you all. This is really what I wanted to show you today. So far, so good? Everybody happy? Oh, wow, I've got 70 of you out there while watching me on Friday night. I don't know how many of you have one of these. If you have a brother, you've probably seen one of these up close and personal in a bag, and you're like, what is that doohickey, and why do I have it? And what this is for, if you look in the book, it'll tell you it's the second spool holder for running dual needles. Now, I'm going to show you a trick. I'm going to blow your mind. Learn something new today. You might already know this, and if you do, I'm sorry. It's not. I'm kind of building this up, but I'm going to show you something. This thing is actually designed to sit. It's actually a pretty interesting design. This thing actually goes, if you look, it snaps, that hole snaps right onto your bobbin winder. That's what it's for. For if you're running dual needles, you need to have 2 spools of thread to run through each of the needles that you're running if you're running twin needles. That's what it's designed for. It's kind of like that. You see how you can put your thread on there? Here, let's go back over here. Yeah, because we've got camera technology, so might as well use it, right? So you'll see there that that's going to be the same as if it's down here. The other thing that this is really used for, if you ever do that, is say you've got one of these spools that you want to embroider with and you want to do some fancy stitching with, and all you have is these little, what they call, I think call them cop spools. Anyway, not the mini cones, but what this thing does now, if you look, you turn it sideways. Look what happens when you turn that thing sideways. When I pull my thread, if I get it off the end of the spool, if I pull of course I'm going to try and demonstrate this, but this is the worst thread in the world for that. Let me see, I'll hold it tight and we'll put it on. So if I pull my thread now through the thread path, you see how that's spinning as it comes off? That's what this is for. In fact, I should probably turn it around so that it's not falling off. But that's what this little adapter is for, is so if you're running the old school style, you know, some old Coates and Clark or some hologram, whatever this is, you can see how that's spinning as I pull it off. That's what that little adapter is made for. That little plastic doohickey that every brother machine comes with, that's what it's for. So you'll notice that as we pull it off with stuff that's wound straight, that it spins as it comes off. And it's also, like I said, you can turn it the other way and get twin needle out of it. But that's for when I just destroyed my machine. Anyway, questions? We've gone on way longer than I should have. And I have to get home tonight because I think we're out of power. Might come back on. According to the power map, it says we have lights back. But if I don't have lights back when I get home, guess what I get to do? I get to rebuild the generator carburetor by lantern light. Doesn't that sound like fun? So that's kind of the other reason why I keep rambling on, is I'm not looking forward to sitting in the garage with a little lantern trying to put a carburetor back together so the generator will work. But that might be what my night turns into. I'm hoping the lights are on when I get home. But anyway, any other questions? Any other questions at all? Oh, wait. We got lots of comments. Hold on. I've never seen them before. Well, you have one. I can promise you, Danny, that you probably have one of those here. We're going to go into we're going to do you ever watch those videos? So I catch myself watching YouTube videos now because, I'm like a YouTube wannabe. And they stare at the camera and I have like cool title screens and that's not me. So that's like an awful angle over here. We'll do that while we read comments and questions. Okay. Oh, okay. I never thought of top. Okay. I'm glad you all got something out of it. No questions. Okay. If there's no questions, I'm hoping that this 40 minutes of your life that I took from you was worth the time. If it's not, I'd say take it up with, I don't know. But hey, we try. We have fun. Like I said, come into the store, because that's why we do this, is to encourage you to come to our store or buy stuff from us online. I guess I should get serious about this, like get title graphics and throw up signs and have like commercials like, hey, shop at 4pintsquilting.com. And have like merch. Like I wear like T-shirt Republic shirts. I should probably get like a 4 Pints thing. But anyway, thanks for watching. Also, I guess while I'm here rambling, come in and buy sewing machines. We're stocked right now with embroidery machines. We've got a nice selection of embroidery machines on the floor. I've got one of the new Stellaires in the box ready to go. I've got a Dream machine in the box ready to go. One of the last of the Dream machines, so those are getting harder and harder to come by. We've got a 3600D. That's probably going away tomorrow because I have a feeling I'm going to talk Jocelyn into taking it home because she wants a Disney machine, and that's a nice little machine for the money. But I have a 3600D you can look at. I have got a PRS 100 free arm embroidery machine. We have one of those used. Really nice machine. I just got the stand in for it, so it's got the whole package, the stand, the machine, and everything. And I can't tell you prices because it's the internet. So if you're interested, call me, shoot me an email. But we've got a PRS 100, which is a great machine if you want to do hats, bags. You're thinking about kind of getting in the embroidery business. That's a great little machine for that. But like I said, we are really stocked on good machines right now because we're trying to, thinking if somebody wants a Christmas present, now is the time. So come look at embroidery machines. And if you have any questions, like I said, call, shoot me an email. Anyway, thanks for watching. Now that I've done rambling, and I really should get home because I do have to look at that generator, which is going to be loads of fun. I just got done fighting with a car. I told you all about the story about the car that Danny traded me for a machine. Well, I had to fix the carburetor on that last week. Got that running. Runs fantastic. Great little car. I got to put it away for the winter because it's going to start snowing here soon. But anyway, I keep digressing. I should just say I'm done. I don't have Eddie here to look at me like I'm weird and tell me to shut up. That's really what he does for me. Not only plays the music, he makes weird faces, and I know when I'm, have overstayed my welcome. All right. Thanks for watching. Tell your friends, come visit, and, keep on sewing. Keep on smiling. Life's too short not to. Thanks for watching.